Is the man still in your house?
Yes, he's laying there on the floor with a bullet in his head.
Did you shoot him?
Yes, I shot him. He was killing my wife.
Who is this man?
I don't know who he is.
Is he dead?
I don't know. He's making weird sounds. Please, my baby's crying. My baby's crying. I gotta go. I'll call you right back.
Mark Winger and Donna Brown's relationship did not begin with some whirlwind romance or dramatic beginning. They met the way a lot of people do. Two mutual friends thought they might be a good match and set them up on a blind date in Springfield, Illinois, sometime in the late 1980s. And honestly, for them, that simple introduction was enough, and they started dating. Donna was working as an operating room tech back then, practical, organized, the reliable type who always had everything under control. Mark was a nuclear engineer, quiet, steady, polite in that kind of old-fashioned way. They weren't flashy, they weren't chaotic, they just fit. Naturally, calmly, the kind of pairing everyone nodded at and said, yeah, that makes sense. Their relationship grew the normal way, meeting each other's families, weekend visits, gatherings, dinners. Nothing dramatic, nothing true crime foreshadowy, just two people building something steady together. By 1989, they decided to get married. Their wedding on March 4th at Temple Solal in Hollywood, Florida, wasn't extravagant. Just a warm, family-centered ceremony that felt exactly right for them. Afterward, they settled in Illinois, where Mark took a job in Springfield. And the early years of their marriage were the kind everyone recognizes. Work, visits, routines, building their future one ordinary day at a time. One of the challenges they faced early on was starting a family. When they learned they couldn't conceive biologically, they slowly began exploring adoption. No rush, no panic, just thoughtful conversation over time. By 1994 and into early 1995, the adoption process became more real. Donna learned through a hospital colleague about a young woman planning an adoption, and from there, things moved forward in a steady and hopeful way. Then on June 1st, 1995, their daughter Bailey was born and officially became a winger. Those first weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Sleepless nights, bottles everywhere, a house permanently half cleaned, but filled with excitement. Friends visited, family flew in, Bailey's baby pictures were taped to the fridge and mailed to grandparents. Everything looked typical, happy, settled. From the outside, if you were watching The Wingers between 1989 and mid-1995, you'd see nothing but a completely normal family life playing out. Marriage, home, careers, routines, adoption, and now a newborn baby. Nothing strange, nothing tense, nothing hinting at what was coming. Life just looked normal.
Here's Grandma Drescher.
He's feeling very comfortable these days with Bailey, and I think we've sort of bonded a little bit.
Oh, I think we bonded a lot.
In the weeks after the adoption, the house took on that predictable newborn rhythm. The kind where you're not even living by the clock anymore, just by feeding times and nap schedules. Mark went to work, Donna stayed home on leave, Bailey was the center of everything.
Tonight is Friday night, and we have services tonight, and tonight is her naming.
By early July, Donna planned a trip to Florida so her family could spend more time with the baby. It wasn't a dramatic or emotional trip, just a regular family visit. She and Bailey flew down, stayed with her parents, and everyone got baby cuddles, photos, and ordinary memories. When it was time to return home, Donna booked a very common route. Fly into St. Louis, then take a shuttle van from the airport back to Springfield. And this, quietly, is where the first cracks in the story appears. On July 29th, Donna landed in St. Louis as planned and boarded a BART transportation van to take her home. The driver assigned to her was Roger Harrington, a 27-year-old guy who worked for the shuttle company. Nothing physically unsafe happened on the ride, but Donna told Mark she felt uncomfortable. She said Roger talked way too much, asked personal questions, drove oddly, nothing dangerous, just unsettling, enough that she mentioned it when she got home. Mark told her to write everything down while it was fresh, and she did. And he sent the complaint to the company. BART suspended Roger, which was standard procedure, nothing unusual. And after that, life inside the Winger home went right back to normal. Nothing else happened, no threats, no follow-up from Roger, no strange phone calls, no strange visits, nothing. Just life moving steadily back into its routine. And that takes us to the morning of August 23rd of 1995. The morning of August 23rd didn't look any different than the dozens before it. Bailey was almost 3 months old, and if you've ever lived with a newborn, you know. Mornings blur together. There's no mystery, no build-up, just bottles, soft blankets, and a house that moves at half speed because everyone is tired. That's exactly how this day started. Mark got ready for the day the same way he always did. Donna took care of the baby, moving through the quiet morning routine. Sometime between 8 and 8:30, Mark told the police he went downstairs to get in a workout on the treadmill. It was one of his regular habits, nothing out of place. Donna stayed upstairs, caring for Bailey, probably doing what all new moms do, juggling feeding, rocking her in her arms, maybe tidying up. And then, according to Mark's account, at 9:15 or 9:20, he came back upstairs. And everything changed. He later said that as he walked toward the hallway, something felt wrong. He said he heard noises, sounds that didn't fit the hum of a normal morning. And when he rounded the corner into the hallway, he said he saw something that made no sense at all. An intruder. And not just anyone. The same shuttle driver Donna had filed a complaint about. Mark told police that Roger Harrington was inside their home, and that Donna was already gravely injured. He said Harrington was holding one of their own household tools, a hammer, and that the scene he walked into looked like a violent attack already in progress. According to Mark, he ran to the bedroom, retrieved his firearm, and came back. He said he fired multiple rounds trying to stop Harrington and save Donna. When everything went still, both Donna and Harrington were on the floor. At 9:21 a.m., Mark called 911.
Is the man still in your house?
Yes, he's laying there on the floor with a bullet in his head.
Did you shoot him?
Yes, I shot him. He was killing my wife.
Who is this man?
I don't know who he is.
Is he dead?
I don't know. He's making weird sounds. Please, my baby's crying. My baby's crying. I gotta go. I'll call you right back.
Police and emergency services reached the Winger home within minutes. When they came inside, this is what they found. Roger Harrington, gravely injured, still alive and still making sounds. Donna in a critical condition, barely responsive. Bailey, thankfully unharmed in another room. And Mark, visibly emotional, repeating the same explanation from the call, that he had walked in on an attack. Paramedics rushed Donna to the Memorial Medical Center. Sadly, shortly after arriving, she was pronounced dead. Harrington was still alive when responders arrived, but his injuries were so severe, he soon died after. At this point, in these first hours, everyone believed exactly what they were looking at. A grieving husband who had walked into the worst moment imaginable. A violent intruder with a documented complaint in his history. And a young mother whose life had been taken in her own home. The story made sense, the evidence seemed to line up, and no one had any reason yet to look deeper. In the hours after Donna's death, things moved fast. In hindsight, almost too fast. At the hospital, Donna's family arrived, devastated and confused. At the house, officers documented the scene, the hallway, the hammer, the firearm, the position of the bodies, Harrington's belongings, and the car outside. Everything matched what Mark had described. And one detail in particular shaped the way investigators saw the entire situation. Just weeks earlier, Donna had made a complaint about Harrington. She'd written down the details of that uncomfortable shuttle ride. Mark had submitted the complaint, and the transportation company had suspended Harrington. So to officers, the story basically completed itself. A suspended driver comes back angry. He breaks into the couple's home. He harms Donna. And Mark comes upstairs at the wrong moment and does what any desperate husband would. It looked open and shut. And honestly, no one in law enforcement had a reason to question it. The emotional weight of that morning, a harmed young mother, a frantic husband, a baby crying in the background. Everything added pressure to a quick, clear conclusion. Within a couple of days, the case was formally ruled. Justifiable use of force. A husband protecting his family. Funerals happened in 2 different states. Donna's parents and sisters moved between Florida and Illinois, trying to make sense of all of it. Roger Harrington's family grieved quietly, confused, heartbroken, and unsure how someone they loved became the villain in a story they didn't understand. But to the public, one narrative dominated. Mark Winger was a widower who had survived an unimaginable attack. Springfield wrapped around him. Friends, co-workers, neighbors. Everyone focused on helping him rebuild some version of a normal life for his baby daughter. People bought food, they babysat, they offered comfort. And for months after, that was the end of it. The police closed the file. Reporters moved on. Families tried to heal in their own ways. There was no suspicion, no whispers, no second thoughts, just grief. And for a long time, that was all anyone saw. But beneath that calm surface, small cracks were forming. Not enough to cause alarm, not enough to open up a cold case file, but enough that, in hindsight, you can look back and see the faint beginning of a different story. Donna's family had questions, not accusations, just things that didn't sit right in their hearts. And a former officer mentioned that something about the scene had always felt off, though he couldn't pinpoint what. And then, quietly in the background, someone connected to the Winger home, someone who had known Donna, began carrying a secret that would take years to unravel. Those cracks wouldn't matter until much later, but they were there, waiting. There was someone quietly orbiting the Winger home. Her name was Deanne Schultz. She knew Donna from the hospital. They weren't best friends, but they were friendly, close enough that she'd been to the house, held the baby, chatted in the kitchen. And during those weeks after Bailey's adoption, when Donna was learning to be a new mom, Mark and Deanne started spending more time together. At first, Deanne didn't think anything of it. Mark was charming, polite, intelligent, the kind of guy who carried himself like he had everything under control. Later under oath, Deanne would say it clearly. Their relationship turned romantic in July of 1995, while Donna was very much alive, caring for her 3-month-old daughter. Deanne didn't see it as an affair at the time. She saw a stressed husband confiding in her, someone who said he felt overwhelmed, someone who made her feel needed. Years later, she would say she didn't understand the gravity of it until the truth forced its way to the surface. There were things Mark said, small comments at the time, that grew louder in her memory as the years passed. Things like, "It would be easier for us to be together if Donna were no longer here. All you'd have to do is come in and discover what happened. I need to get that driver to come to the house." At the time, Deanne brushed these off as emotional venting. But when detectives revisited her years later and laid out the contradictions, the forensic impossibilities, the truth behind the timeline, those comments suddenly fit together like puzzle pieces she never wanted to see. Even after the tragedy, the funeral, the investigation, the public sympathy, Deanne remained in Mark's life. Not constantly, not officially, but enough that she helped with Bailey sometimes. Enough that the emotional tie didn't dissolve. It only ended after a few months, when she began to distance herself. But the emotional damage, the guilt, the confusion stayed with her for years. In early 1996, just months after Donna died, Mark hired a young woman named Rebecca Simic to help care for Bailey. Rebecca was quiet, kind, nurturing, and came from a conservative family. She wasn't involved in the investigation. She wasn't part of the complicated history behind the scenes. She was just hired to help a widowed father. But very quickly, things changed. By 1997, Mark and Rebecca were married. Rebecca adopted Bailey. They had more children together. And from the outside, it looked like a fresh start. A new family, a new life, new happiness. To Donna's family, the speed of the remarriage was surprising, but they didn't see it as suspicious. People grieve in different ways, and everyone believed Mark had endured one of the worst tragedies imaginable. So, Rebecca built a home, unaware of the storm forming beneath her feet. Nothing happened in 1998. No police activity, no suspicions. Mark and Rebecca lived an ordinary suburban life. But by 1999, small things began to stir. Donna's parents asked for copies of items from the case file. Not accusations, just lingering questions they couldn't shake. A former police officer said, in passing, that the few parts of the scene had never made sense to him. And quietly, Deanne began to spiral. Years after ending the relationship, she confided to a friend that things Mark had said never fully added up. But she still did not go to the police. In 2000, the first spark of doubt flickered inside the Springfield Police Department. Not enough to reopen anything yet, just enough to remember that the case, as clean as it looked, had a few threads sticking out. Threads that no one had ever pulled. Not until a therapist, a mandatory report, and a confession finally forced the first one loose. It was 2001, 6 years after Donna and Roger had died. Mark Winger had remarried, he had more children, he had a full suburban life. And absolutely no one, not the police, not the public, not even his own wife, suspected a thing. Except for one person, Deanne Schultz. Deanne had carried the weight of her secret for years. The relationship, the comments, the guilt she didn't know how to name, and the sinking feeling that she had been part of something she didn't understand. By 2001, she was struggling deeply, emotionally and mentally. And during a severe mental health crisis, she finally said it out loud. Something about Donna's death wasn't right. She did not say this to the police, not to a reporter, not to a family member, but to her therapist. And therapists under Illinois law have one obligation when a patient reveals information that suggests harm or potential harm. They must report it. That one moment, a single conversation in a private office, is what cracked the case open. And it cracked it quietly. Before we go any further into evidence, timelines, and courtroom drama, it's important to stop and remember who this is really about. Donna Ellen Winger wasn't a headline. She wasn't a case. She was a person. Born in 1963, she grew up in South Florida in a close, loving family. She was the oldest of 3 sisters, the responsible one, the protector, the one who naturally looked after everyone else. People who knew her described her as soft-spoken but strong-willed, gentle but firm when it mattered, and always thinking about everyone around her. At work, Donna was an operating room technician. It wasn't a flashy job, but it was one that requires steady hands and a steady heart. Co-workers remember her as calm in pressure, kind with patients, and respectful of the fast-paced, demanding environment around her. She wasn't the kind of person to chase the spotlight. She was the kind of person who made sure things were quietly taken care of. Outside of work, her favorite moments were simple ones. Visiting her parents, laughing with her sisters, taking little trips, and building a steady life with the people she loved. And for years, one hope sat quietly at the center of her life. She wanted to be a mum. When she and Mark adopted Bailey on June 1st, 1995, her family said they had never seen her so happy. She finally had the baby she dreamed of, and she poured all that gentle, organized, thoughtful energy into being a new mother. Donna was a devoted daughter, a loving sister, a dedicated health worker, and a new mum who absolutely adored her child. Her life was defined by care, consistency, and love, not by the way it ended, and not by the lies that were told after. In every version of this story, through all the twists and the forensic details, the heart of this is: Donna was a woman who deserved to grow old, raise her daughter, and keep living the life she worked so hard to build.
Pretty?
She sure
Hi,
does.
Bailey. Say hi, Grandma Sarah.
There's another person whose name gets pulled into this story almost like a plot device. The shuttle driver, the intruder, the man in the hallway. But he was more than that. His name was Roger Harrington, and he was just 27 years old when he lost his life. Roger grew up in Illinois and worked a variety of jobs before he started driving for BART transportation. The people who worked with him described him as friendly, talkative, sometimes a little quirky, but genuinely kind and eager to help passengers. There was nothing in his past that pointed to him being dangerous or aggressive. When the case was first closed back in 1995, Roger was remembered publicly as the stranger who had come into a family home to cause harm. That version of the story followed his family for years. They had to grieve their son while also hearing him described as a threat, a role that never matched the person they knew. For a long time, the official story painted him as the villain. But when the case was reopened and investigators really looked at the evidence, the car, the note, the lack of physical contact with Donna, the meeting details, they began to see what his family had always insisted. Roger was not the person the original narrative made him out to be. Roger was a young man who walked into that house believing he was going to clear up a problem and maybe get his job back. Instead, he was pulled into a situation he didn't create and didn't understand. And for years, his name carried a shadow that he did not deserve. His life mattered too. And just like Donna, Roger deserves to be remembered for who he was, not just for how his life was taken, and not for the false role he was made to occupy in someone else's story. Detectives pulled the old case files out of storage boxes, the crime scene photos, the original reports, the autopsy documents, the 911 recording, the Polaroids taken by responding officers, Donna's note, everything. And because 6 years had passed, because they had no bias, no emotional connection, no memory of the chaotic morning, they looked at the evidence with fresh eyes. The more they looked, the more the pieces shifted out of place. It was as if someone had slightly rearranged a puzzle years ago, just enough that no one noticed. And now, with distance, the mismatched edges were obvious. When detectives re-examined the hallway photos, they noticed something the original team had missed. Roger Harrington's body was positioned in a way that didn't match a violent struggle. Instead of looking like someone who had collapsed mid-attack, he looked like someone who had been already down when some of the shots were fired. One expert described it bluntly. This doesn't look like chaos. It looks staged. And Donna's injuries told their own story. Deep, repeated impacts, delivered with force, delivered with control. Not during a frantic fight, not during a life or death struggle, but while she was lying on the ground. And then came the detail that would reshape everything. There was no evidence, none, that Roger Harrington had ever touched Donna. No transferred hairs, no defensive bruising, no fibers from his clothing, nothing. And the hammer Mark claimed Roger used, it had 0 DNA from Roger on it. Not a single trace. In 1995, the investigators didn't analyze the projectile angles deeply because they didn't think they had to. But in 2001, the angles told a different story. Several shots had been fired downward, at an angle consistent with Roger being on the floor, not attacking anyone. This directly contradicted Mark's claim that he shot while Roger was on top of Donna. The hallway walls, too, were wrong for a chaotic fight. No erratic patterns, no marks from movements, no evidence of a desperate struggle. It looked controlled, intentional, methodical. Remember the note that Donna wrote the day of the shuttle ride? In 1995, it helped convince investigators that Harrington was a real threat. But now, detectives saw something chilling. The note fit Mark's latest story too perfectly. A frightened woman, a suspended driver, a motive for revenge, a villain already written into the script. One investigator said it best. It looked less like a warning and more like a setup. Detectives revisited everyone. Donna's family said she was shaken by the shuttle ride, but she was not terrified. Harrington's co-workers said he was upset about being suspended, but never violent. Harrington's family said he wouldn't have gone to the house. He wouldn't hurt anyone. One by one, the assumptions holding up the original story collapsed. And then came the discovery that tied everything together. Inside Roger's vehicle, untouched for years, investigators found his cigarettes, his coffee mug, his tools, and a handwritten note with Mark Winger, the home address, and the meeting time. This was the moment investigators realized Roger hadn't gone there to hurt anyone. He had gone there for a meeting. This one piece of evidence rewrote the entire morning. With fresh analysis, detectives reconstructed Mark's timeline, minute by minute. It did not fit, not even close. His workout couldn't have lasted as long as he claimed. His 911 call timing didn't match the injuries. And most importantly, there was enough time for Donna and Harrington to be harmed before Mark ever dialed 911. This disproved the central claim of his story. Then came Deanne's formal interview. She admitted to the relationship, the timeline, Mark's disturbing comments, the fear she now carried, and the guilt she held for years. And suddenly, the puzzle snapped into a horrifying picture. By late 2001, the state's attorney's office wasn't thinking maybe. They were preparing for prosecution. Because the evidence, the science, the logic, the forensics, all pointed to one conclusion. Mark Winger's story was impossible. Not unlikely, not suspicious, impossible. And then there was the reanalysis of the 911 call. Investigators could hear something else. Not a baby crying like Mark insisted, but what sounded like Roger Harrington moaning, meaning Harrington was still alive during that call.
Is he dead?
I don't know. He's making weird sounds. Please, my baby's crying. My baby's crying. I gotta go. I'll call you right back.
Once detectives pieced the evidence together, the stage scene, the downward shots, the inconsistent timeline, Deanne's testimony, and the note found in Roger's car, there was no room for doubt. What had once been treated as a tragic act of self-defense was now viewed as something deliberate, calculated, and deeply disturbing. In early 2001, the state's attorney prepared formal charges. And in the first time since 1995, officers headed to the Winger home not to offer condolences, but to arrest the man they had once comforted. Mark Winger was taken into custody on charges of first-degree murder for the deaths of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. Neighbors watched in disbelief. Co-workers were stunned. Friends who once rallied around him suddenly questioned everything they thought they knew. The widower, who had been embraced by the community, was now being led away in handcuffs. News spread fast. A case the town had long considered closed was suddenly the most talked about story in Springfield. In the months that followed, prosecutors built their case piece by piece. The forensic reconstruction, the contradictions in Mark's timeline, the lack of any evidence Harrington ever touched Donna, the downward bullet trajectories, the hammer with none of Harrington's DNA, phone records suggesting a planned meeting, and Deanne's chilling statements. Meanwhile, Mark maintained his innocence. He hired attorneys, gave interviews, and insisted everything was a misunderstanding, a tragic coincidence twisted into something sinister. But behind the scenes, the evidence was tightening around him like a vice. When the trial finally opened, in 2002, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat. Families sat across the aisle from each other, one grieving a daughter, one grieving a son, both seeking truth. The prosecution laid out a story the public had never heard before. Not a sudden burst of violence, but a plan. A plan involving an unhappy husband, a manufactured threat, a staged scene, and a man lured into a deadly trap. Witness after witness took the stand. Forensic experts, crime scene analysts, family members, and finally, Deanne Schultz. Her voice shook as she revealed the comments Mark had made. the desperation, the manipulation, the very words that in hindsight held the truth she hadn't recognized back then. The picture became clearer each day, and eventually, after all the testimony, all the evidence, and all the years of buried doubt, the jury withdrew to deliberate. It didn't take them long, and when the courtroom reconvened, everyone held their breath. Mark Winger, once the grieving husband the community embraced, now stood accused of planning and executing a double murder. The foreperson read the verdict: guilty for the murder of Donna Winger, guilty for the murder of Roger Harrington. A collective breath moved through the room. Shock for some, validation for others, heartbreak for all. And with the verdict returned, the case moved to sentencing. After the guilty verdict, the courtroom reconvened for sentencing. This was the moment where many families hope, even just a little, for remorse, for acknowledgement, for humanity. Mark Winger offered none. He stood, looked directly at the judge, and delivered a calm, measured denial, as if reading lines he'd been rehearsing for years. I did not take my wife's life. I did not take Roger Harrington's life. I have already lost everything. You're asking me to confess to something I did not do. I am innocent, and I always will be. His tone never wavered. No tears, no cracks in his voice, no recognition of Donna, no mention of Roger, no acknowledgement of Bailey, whose life he had forever altered. Just detachment, a chilling contrast to the families who were about to speak. Donna's sister stood, trembling but composed, and spoke through her grief. She said of Donna that she was a light we will never get back. She loved deeply, she lived kindly, and she deserved her future. Her words were simple, but the weight behind them filled the entire courtroom. Donna's parents did not talk about anger. Instead, they talked about gratitude. Gratitude that the truth had finally been spoken out loud. Not because it erased their pain, not because it brought back their daughter, but because the narrative that defined Donna's last moments had finally been corrected. They had waited 7 years to hear the truth replace the lies. Roger Harrington's mother spoke, and when she spoke about her son, her voice shook. Her son, who had been painted as a villain for years. He was never the monster he was made out to be, she said, and she described the agony of losing a child, and then watching the world treat that child as an aggressor, a threat, an intruder. Then she finally said the words she had wanted to speak for so long. His name can finally be spoken without shame. That moment was monumental for her family, for Roger. He had lost his life too. And now, for the first time, the courtroom affirmed that he had not deserved the blame placed on him. Before reading the sentence, the judge spoke firmly, not angrily, but with clarity that filled the room. 2 innocent lives were taken, one through direct harm, one through deception, and the court's responsibility is to ensure that accountability follows truth. Then came the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark didn't react, not a flinch, just that same blank stare that unsettled so many people in the years before. For most people, this is where the story ends. But with Mark Winger, it wasn't. About 3 years after he was sent to prison, investigators uncovered something chilling all over again. Mark had been writing, not letters of remorse, not reflections, but a 19-page murder for hire scenario. 2 targets: Deanne Schultz, the woman whose testimony helped reopen the case, and the childhood friend, simply because he wouldn't pay Mark's bail. Mark claimed it was just fantasy, but prosecutors didn't see it that way.
People coming forward and confessing that they lied. Now, killing, I think that's a little far-fetched.
He was tried a second time, this time for solicitation of murder, and once again, the jury didn't hesitate. He was convicted, and the judge added 35 more years to his sentence. Even behind bars, Mark Winger remained dangerous. And while Mark's whole world grew smaller and darker, someone else's life began to quietly heal. Bailey. She was just 3 months old when she lost her mother, 6 years old when her father was arrested, and raised with love and protection by Rebecca, who shielded her from the chaos swirling around her name. When Bailey reached adulthood, Rebecca made a decision she felt was long overdue. She brought Bailey to meet Donna's family. It had been decades. The last time they held her, she was barely 3 years old. But when Bailey walked through that door, Donna's sisters wrapped her in their arms like no time had passed at all. They cried, they laughed, they whispered stories Bailey had never heard, stories about her mother's warmth, her gentle humor, her dreams for the daughter she adored. That reunion, that love, that healing, was exactly what Donna would have wanted for her daughter. And for the first time since 1995, Bailey got to feel just how deeply she had been wanted, not only by her mother, but by an entire family who had never stopped loving her. This case is filled with manipulation, betrayal, careful, evil planning, and unimaginable loss. But in the aftermath of all that cruelty, something gentle survived. Donna's memory, Roger's innocence, and Bailey, grown, loved, and surrounded by the family who never forgot her. In a case that is defined by deception, love is the thing that endured.